Hello. Good morning, good evening, good middle of the night, whatever it is for you. Um, we are going to talk about the thinker Immanuel Kant, and he followed um, Descartes and Hume and had an interesting philosophical synthesis of their thought. So we'll see what that was. So Immanuel Kant lived from 1724 to 1804, and I often ask myself, what did they know about the American Revolution? I'm sure he knew about a lot about the French Revolution. Um, so he never left a certain area. Königsberg is in Germany now, but it was then in East Prussia. Uh, and he studied at the University of Königsberg until he earned the equivalent of a PhD. So I don't know what they had at the time. Um, so he got a job as a private docent. I'm sorry, my German's so good. A tutor paid directly by his students. So he would just, I guess, like put his shingle out, so to speak, and hang his shingle out, so to speak, the way doctors would, I guess, once upon a time. And his students would come to him and learn from him, and they would pay him. So eventually he was hired at age 46, which is older than I am, as a professor of logic and metaphysics. So maybe soon I'll be hired as a professor of logic and metaphysics. I mean, if Kant could do it, of course he had that PhD. I don't have that yet. So what did Kant think? I said he did a synthesis of Descartes and Hume's thought. Well, he considered rationalism and empiricism to be mistakes. With rationalism, we never seem to get any explanation of the relationship between the the ego or the cogito, the thinking thing that Descartes said he was, and that we all were, and the external world. I mean, Descartes came up with an argument for the external world's existence, but Cartesian dualism results in what seems to be an unbridgeable gap between mind and world. On the other hand, Hume said that we got okay, so Descartes, remember, said we get all our knowledge from innate ideas that we just have from the time we're born. Um, and that they're not based on the world. Whereas Hume said everything we know is based on the world. All knowledge comes from the world. But he didn't think there was cause and effect. I mean, he had a kind of cause and effect that I studied Hume in a class, and I still think he didn't come up with cause and effect, um, and that he denied it. And um, the British empiricists, what they did is they created a similar gulf between the mind and the world by saying, okay, we have these perceptions and we all our knowledge comes from these perceptions and the perceptions come from the external world, but like how that worked was never worked out. And the skepticism of the empiricists, particularly Hume, got rid of other ideas that common sense and science and everyday experience supposedly confirm, like the existence of the outside world, like the existence of God. So many people believe in God, and that this will factor into Kant's thought too, the fact that so many people rely upon the idea. Um, So when I say common sense, science, and everyday experience refuted them, I mean refuted Descartes and Hume particularly. Um, but Kant didn't want to just say, well, philosophy's just garbage. He didn't want to throw it away. He wanted to avoid a world uh epistemologically ruled by the mechanistic science that was emerging during the Enlightenment, where everything was inhuman and everything was made of matter and was driven by deterministic cause and effect relations, and there was no mind and there was no God, and there was no soul, and so on. Um, Kant didn't like that at all. So he valued the scientific method, and so he that's where he started. He said Descartes got part of the method right, the part of the scientific method. He got the part where we are rational minds. But he left out the organizing power of the mind, which allows us to do more than he thought we could. And on the other hand, Hume, um, science looks at the external world, sure, but it doesn't just passively take it in. And the mind is not a blank slate, the way John Locke especially thought of it. And there's this interaction between the mind and the world in modern science. And so Kant said this is what was overlooked by Descartes and by Hume and by the other British empiricists. Kant came up with an idea. I think the book says he called it a Copernican revolution in philosophy. I was surprised because there's a sidebar in which he says that being a master of wisdom is not something that um, a modest person would claim of themselves. So to say that he was doing a Copernican revolution in philosophy seems immodest. Anyway, what it amounts to, of course, Copernicus sw switched, in a sense, the significance of the sun and the earth. The Ptolemaic model had the sun orbiting the earth along with everything else in the solar system. So that was the geocentric model of the solar system. And it had its problems. And then along comes Copernicus, who didn't publish his um his book on the okay, so he published his book, if I remember correctly. He published his book, I forget what it was called, um, as simply a possible way of looking at the world without claiming, yes, this is the way things are, because he didn't want to get in trouble with the church, the Catholic Church, the way Galileo did later. Um, so anyway, I'm talking about the wrong revolution. This is the Copernican revolution in philosophy. And so instead of the mind having to conform to what can be known must conform to the mind. So this is a kind of a tongue twister, mind bender for me, I think. So, in what ways was it said that the mind had to conform to what can be known? Well, Descartes said the mind only knew its um, innate ideas and the self-examination it could perform, but it didn't get any knowledge from the external world. And for Hume, the mind was only exposed to these perceptions, including perceptions of itself, but it never came up with ideas on its own. It was a passive absorber of experience. And we will see, and so that is in the mind having to conform to what can be known. And this second part is what I'm going to try to explain on the next page. What can be known must conform to the mind. And this zeroes in especially on the British empiricist notion of the mind as the tabula rasa or blank slate. So in Kant's thought, there are two worlds, kind of reminiscent of Plato. There's the noumenal world, which has the things in themselves. That's the objective object that endures and undergoes changes. Um, but it's unknowable. Oh, I typo there. The phenomenal world is the world of our experience, and it is the world of forms that the mind makes of the noumena, is what we know. The world we know. Okay, somehow I like copied and cut and pasted. So we know nothing about the noumenal world in itself. So I was trying to explain this to somebody, who was not a student of mine, and she had trouble grasping it. So I'm gonna try to explain it as best I can. So remember, there are two worlds. So there's the world of my experience. So imagine yourself holding a metal water bottle the way I'm doing right now. You can't see it, of course, but imagine yourself doing it the way you would do it. Now, what is the water bottle really? So for Kant, the phenomenal world is the world of theoretical knowledge, and it's not the world of the things in themselves. We just get, kind of like the empiricists said, we get impressions from the noumena, but not like the empiricists said. Rather than the mind being a passive absorber of these impressions are kind of run through a filter. If you've read Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception, which I can recommend, it it's a lot like that, where the mind isn't capable of letting in everything that comes to it. It's not, as Hume said, but not in the way Hume said. So, like Hume said, the mind is not equipped to deal with things in themselves. So, it has to shape the impressions it gets from the things in themselves so that they can become human experience. So behind this water bottle we're both holding, or pretending to hold, or imagining we're holding, um, there is the water bottle in itself. And I don't know what that is. It doesn't necessarily look like this water bottle. It's imperceptible, except through those impressions that get filtered by the mind. Like time and space exist only in the mind. They don't exist in the world of the noumenal. And that's just one profound example of the way the noumenal world undergo the impressions sent by the noumenal world to us undergo changes. And again, that's the what can be known must conform to the mind part of Kant's Copernican revolution in philosophy. So there are categories, there are transcendental regulative ideas, and these are universal ideas that regulate human understanding. Self, the cosmos, totality, everything that is, not just the physical world, but, um, well, perhaps the physical world, perhaps not the world of the things in themselves. But if we're talking about totality, we would have to include the things in themselves. And also God are three of Kant's main transcendental ideas. These transcendental ideas, Kant's philosophy is called, among other things, transcendental idealism. So these ideas allow us to say there is a self, there is a God, there is an external world, there is cause and effect. Whereas Hume and Descartes said, if you take into account both of their philosophies, not just where they overlap, they said that these things don't exist. So for Kant, we can say they exist because we have these transcendental ideas. And not only that, but we rely upon these ideas in our everyday life. The way that everyday life and um, science served as evidence against Hume and against Descartes is is kind of the way that these transcendental ideas serve as evidence for the self and God and the external world and cause and effect. They're useful. We rely upon them. So they must exist. So Kant reasoned. One important development in Kant's philosophy is his preservation of free will. For for definitely for Hume, free will, I think, did not exist. And despite the mechanistic view of the sciences, where there can be no free will, even according to Kant, and we have to remember Hume had a view of the sciences with a different cause and effect than uh, what we think of today with physical laws. Science of Kant's day was heading toward physical laws that determine how everything works. And so there's no room for free will in a world with cause and effect that determines everything that happens, the rules of physical events. Because in the view of science, Kant sees it as saying humans are only physical creatures. And he wants to preserve these other things that were ruled out by um, the empiricists and Descartes. So we know through reason rather than experience that these things exist. And we know through reason, according to Kant, that free will exists. So let me get back to it really. Despite the mechanistic view, Kant said that cause and effect belong only to the phenomenal world and not at all to the noumenal world. So there is like my finger in itself in the noumenal world, and there is me in myself in the noumenal world. And it's unknowable, but it's not bound by the physical laws of cause and effect because it's not the physical world is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about another the world of noumena. And so that's how Kant gets free will, is he says it exists through the noumena, whereas in the physical world, sure, no free will. Kant was one of the great moral thinkers, and he was very much his thought was very much centered on the idea of the moral law, and following the moral law was our duty. And he came up with something called the categorical imperative. So let's break that down. Imperative means it must be done, or it must be the case. It is imperative that I breathe, or I'm not going to ever breathe again. Um, and categorical means that's the end of the story. We're talking about absolute, we're talking about certainty, we're talking about everything or everyone in this case. So, in Kant's words, he says, and this is part of a sentence he wrote, I am never to act otherwise than so that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. I made a typo there as well. How did I do that? I am never to act otherwise than so that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. That's kind of a mouthful. So the maxim of my action is the rule that tells me that's the right thing to do. So I'm never to do anything except when I could also say this rule applies to everyone. So if it's right for me to drink water, it's right for everyone to drink water. Of course, that's not a moral. So, like, let's say if it's right for me to give to the poor, it's right for everybody to give to the poor. If it's right for me to um, be grateful when I am given a gift, it's right for everybody to be grateful when they're given a gift. Um, but this doesn't mean everything I do becomes a universal law. It's that we need to figure out what things that we do should become universal laws, universal rules. Can't use the word rule, German for rule. So if it's right for one person to do it, it's right for everyone to do it. If it's right for everyone to do it, it's right for me to do it. It's right for any one person to do it. And if this is not true, if it's not true that because I should thank somebody when I am given a gift, if it's not true that because of that, everyone should thank the person who gives them a gift, um, then performing that action would violate the moral law. So there's no moral law that's just for me. It applies to everyone. And it doesn't come from outside of us. We reason our way to it. We are somehow capable of knowing the good and the right through this categorical imperative. And this is a morality that is not at all based on consequences. So if I do something, but I do it because I want money, and if I do it, I'll get money, then that's not following the moral law. If I do something because it is my duty to do it, that's following the moral law. If I have a good will that's good in itself, no matter what it's able to do, if it would will that it would do the right thing, then it's very valuable, Kant says. And the goodwill does its duty when it can to follow the moral law. And I don't give to the poor because that helps them get out of poverty. I give to the poor because it's the right thing to do. So when we talk about I do it because it's the right thing to do, we're talking about the kind of morality that Kant was dealing with. It's called deontological morality, and it's from the fact of the thing um, being what it is that our duty to do it comes. Whereas consequentialism, and if you take ethics, you'll deal with this a lot more. Consequentialism says, well, if the consequences are good, and we need to know how good they need to be. If they're more good than bad, perhaps you have to figure it out. But it's the consequences that determine whether we should perform some moral act. But that's not Kant. For Kant, consequences don't matter. And that's my best effort right now at summing up Kant's philosophy. So I hope that you enjoy reading about Kant. So thank you very much.